Welcome to the Better World Leaders podcast. Today, we're joined by Sherif Hassanein. Sherif, how's it going?
Good morning. All good, thank you. Like everyone else, adapting to our new way of working and new way of life. But fortunately, things going well on our side.
Yeah, no, you guys have. We were talking off air just a moment ago about how sort of small the minority is that are really sort of keeping everything moving, and sort of keeping everything safe and cold. In your instance, we'll get to that in a little bit. But no, I'm obviously glad that you guys have been kept busy and happy. If you could just share with us where you are today and sort of what's going on around you.
Yes, yeah, I'm managing director for Panasonic's cold chain division in Oceania. So we manufacture and sell fridges and freezers to the major supermarkets. And in our New Zealand business, we've got a broader scope where we also install and service supermarkets and also have an air conditioning business, which is why, fortunately, things are tracking okay for us because servicing supermarkets is seen as an essential business. So we're able to keep going.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Very good. So as a bit of a sort of an intro, Sherif and I have known each other a long time. Our first conversations, I don't even want to think about how long ago they were, but was a while ago, was when I was in headhunting days and the client had asked me to approach Sherif. And we kind of entered into this dialogue very, very quickly of kind of very intense curiosity about each other, because something I found out in doing my research before I even picked up the phone to Sherif was that he'd actually run a factory in my hometown, which was sort of across the freeway from the high school that I went to. So maybe I'll just use that sort of reference to one of our sort of earliest conversations about good old Bury St Edmunds as a segue to take us into the question around your background and where have you been to bring you to where you are today. So tell us about your upbringing and the journey you've been on to today.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you probably guessed from my name, my father's Egyptian, and I was born in Egypt and brought up in the Middle East. I was brought up in Kuwait, and then went to the UK to study chemical engineering at Birmingham University, and then joined sugar business straight after university. And my very first posting was to Bury St Edmunds factory as a graduate trainee, and then I stayed with that business for 26 years across a whole host of different roles and different countries. I was fortunate enough to move with them for work from Bury St Edmunds to other UK centres, and then Poland, Czech Republic, China, and then finally Australia. So quite a long journey, but very exciting and varied career to date, leading up to this Panasonic role.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I won't sort of spend too long in, sort of back in headhunter mode, but the advice so often is don't spend too long with a corporate. Maybe there's a kind of a decade long sort of maximum. Otherwise, you'll get stale, or you'll get tired, or you'll sort of run out of, sort of passion. But, 25 years, sort of a quarter of a very healthy lifespan, and you never stopped growing and never stopped, sort of learning. I think that's the caveat to these very long corporate tenures, that as long as the organization has got the inclination and the capacity to keep, sort of shifting your gears and you've got the impetus to keep moving, then it can be enormously beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think within those 25 years, there's probably been 14 different jobs across 5 or 6 different countries in a number of functions. So the company very much believed in cross-functional development. So my background was operations and engineering, but I had stints in HR and sales and business development along the way. So it didn't feel like 25 years with one company. It felt very much like 10 or 12 different jobs.
Yeah. And how long have you been in Australia now? It must be at least, is it 10, 15 years?
15 years, yep. It'll be 15 years in December.
Yeah, that's right. You're a couple of years ahead of me, but so and this is home now, right? This is where the family is, and this is where you remain for the time being.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I think we came with the intention of working here 4 years and then returning back to the UK. But I think within 1 year we decided to drop anchor, and both kids were born here, and we're now all Australian citizens. So yeah, very much home.
Yeah, very good, and very similar to me, of course, as well. So in those early days, what I suppose were the sort of the early moments when you were sort of starting to reflect on yourself as a leader, and sort of say, well, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Am I making a difference or not? I mean, were there any sort of particular moments that really sort of caught you as you were just moving forward and moving along, and you went, oh, hang on, maybe there's a better way here?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple of examples. I think one, you know, big learning for me out of that experience was getting out of your comfort zone and being thrown into the deep end and learning to swim. And that happened every 18 months or so within that organization. So just as you're getting comfortable in a factory or a role, they would throw you into another factory or give you a cross-functional move. And it never felt easy, but I grew enormously through that experience. So I think that's one very strong view I have looking back on my time within that organization. I think the other one for me is around balance. I like anyone else early in career threw myself into work and fell into the culture that was there at the time, and it was actually quite a macho culture, particularly in the factories, where as production manager or factory manager, you felt you needed to be there to show support and leadership, and when we fired up the factories at the start of a season, you'd do 48 hours straight without sleeping, and then you'd work every weekend whilst the factory was running, which sometimes was 8 or 9 months of the year, and lose all perspective on balance. So family came second, and actually through that macho culture and stepping forward, everyone stepped back. So you probably made things worse. And I guess partway through that experience, I realized that was not helping me or helping the people in the factory or the factory, and just very quickly learned to step away and allow other people to do their jobs that they're much more qualified to do than me, and also allowed me to balance my life with work, because for me that's a very strong pillar in my life. Work is important, but family are more important, and unless you get the balance right, you'll be like many people I've come across over the years whose biggest regret in life is not seeing their kids grow up or spending time with their family. So that was one very, very big lesson for me during that time.
No, I think an invaluable one at that stage in your career as well, and it's something which I've always really admired in you over the years that we've known each other. Your roles have gotten progressively bigger, more complicated and more demanding, yet you've been very consistent with the amount of time that you spend at home and that you invest in in the home life, and I see it sustaining you. I can sort of take the the observation over time that it's helped keep you moving forward. And to use a very extreme comparison, I met a guy the other day who had worked as part of the rescue team in a collapsed mine in Tasmania, going back a few years. And we got into this conversation about, sort of what's it all about, and, why people spend so much time, especially in these very sort of hazardous environments, doing these ridiculous hours in this very macho culture where it's all about, kind of pulling through and keeping on going. And he said, he spent hours underground with these two guys, just talking to them as you can, you're matter of meters through, sort of fallen rock, but you can still, sort of talk to people. And he said not once did either of them ask a question about, their car, or their house, or their paycheck or their compensation. It was always about, the thing I want to do most right now is give my kids one more cuddle, or sort of go for a walk with the wife. And these stories you hear are always the same, but it's very poignant that you often hear them. That classic anecdote of the old age pensioner in the retirement home who says, "Oh, last thing you want to worry about is, did I work enough?" That's great, but that's too late. To have that realization, as you did, I'm guessing in your 30s.
Yes.
That's when you need to have that realization. And you're such a fantastic example of how you can be very successful in the classic corporate environment, and actually in many ways be more successful because you had that realization and found that balance and have protected it. It's not a binary choice. It's not an either or. It's a must, and it actually becomes a baseline for you.
Yep. No, very much so. And it's not that hard. Like in our management team, we had, 14 very skilled managers across operations, engineering, and chemical specialists, and all 14 of us would be in every weekend for the whole season. And you think, well, that's not necessary. So just simply putting in a roster where you have one engineer, one operations person, and one chemist means that you only have to work one weekend day in 3, and the factory's better for it. So it's always been a puzzle in my mind, why we get sucked into this obsession of being at work such long hours when the solution seems so obvious looking back.
Yeah. So what I'll ask you a specific question about now. What approach do you take, to sort of manage the culture and sort of protect the good people that you have around you now?
Very much, what I guess what I experienced very personally, 20 years ago is a pillar of our culture now. So, I do quite a lot of travel with my work, and obviously I'm away from home, 30-40% of the time. So when I'm here, I make a point of leaving work at 5 o'clock and having dinner with the family and putting the kids to bed, and then firing up emails afterwards if need be. And my team know that if I get a call between 5 and 8, I won't take it. And really, we're making fridges. We're not carrying out open heart surgery. So 99 times out of 100, the call can wait till the next day. And I think people do as they see. So what I'm very pleased to see is others following the same path, and also not taking calls till the next morning and switching off at weekends, and we're all better for it. So I think leading by example and setting the tone, I think, allows others to follow suit. And we're part of a Japanese culture, which is as extreme as you can get, I think, in terms of its long working hours and its obsession with being there till the boss leaves. So it's probably even harder adopting those practices when your parent company is so far removed from that. But I mean, even our Japanese parents now respect that and work around it, which is a big win for us.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've worked as a supplier to a number of Japanese companies over the years, Toyota and Daikin, and now with yourselves with Panasonic, and it's got a long way to go. But certainly over the 15 years that I've been working in leadership and with leaders, I've seen a change in Japanese sort of corporate culture. Certainly when they're working with and through a subsidiary in a Western country, I think they are starting to appreciate, hopefully, it's not necessarily best, for the Japanese, sort of executives either, but also it's definitely not the best way to get the best out of, people in other Western cultures. And there's been a shift. I mean, certainly I've seen it in Daikin, to appreciating that, things are done differently, and that's actually better. It's not just okay. Would you agree that there's been a shift that you've observed or not?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, I think there were some very high profile press releases recently of people who've suffered and taken their lives through living through those type of cultures, and it's forced the Japanese government, I think, to put in place some very strong measures to control, that work-life balance. And some of it is a mile off where we need to be. So certainly in Panasonic, there was a directive that came out to say we're going to switch off the lights and the electricity in our offices at 10 o'clock at night, which is one extreme, but secondly, 10 o'clock at night is not 6 o'clock at night. And there's monitoring on laptops now where if you switch a laptop at home, it cuts you out and what have you. So they've had to put in measures like that to ensure people follow those guidelines. But 6 months on, I think everyone's better for it. And the conversations I've had with some of my colleagues in Japan it's been very refreshing.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, we can stand here and say, that level of draconianism is unnecessary and excessive. But if it's working and if it has to be the very strong arm at the beginning, and that hopefully induces a cultural reset, then potentially it's excusable, if not ideal. And then, the sort of the culture of, starting with why and then following through rather than the what and the how will make its way through eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've mentioned a couple of times, what you are doing right now. So let's have a conversation about what you are doing, and in particular, sort of how it's helping. And this is the Better World Leaders podcast. So let's talk about the work that you're doing and that Panasonic are doing in cold chain solutions that is contributing to make the world better.
Yeah. So I'll start this conversation by saying, we're not I think a leading edge, environmentally focused business, but we're doing our bit to try and help, make the world better. And interesting enough, Panasonic's slogan, vision or strapline is better life, better world. So if you go back to the origins of Panasonic, which is just gone past its 100-year anniversary. It's like 101 or 102. The original founder's philosophy was to put back into the community as much as the community was giving him. So his vision was to create products that made everyone's lives better. And I think it was probably more closely linked to making your lives more enjoyable or more efficient or more effective, but undoubtedly that also cascades into also making the right environmental choices as well. So in our small piece, there's a couple of things we're focusing on to try and influence in our small way. One of those is obviously the type of refrigerants we use in our fridges and freezers. Traditional refrigerants are very harmful to the environment, governments are trying to put in place taxes and regulations to drive out some of those harmful refrigerants. But Australia and New Zealand is probably lagging behind Europe and other parts of the world in its adoption of those tight regulations. We've been very strong leaders in that movement over here in Australia and New Zealand, and we've introduced a number of natural refrigerants that will, greatly improve the impact on the environment through what we do. So there's CO2, which is very naturally occurring refrigerant, and also propane, replacing some of the more traditional refrigerants. New Zealand is ahead of Australia in its adoption of some of those refrigerants, and we've now got over 30 supermarkets installed with CO2 refrigerants as their core, if you like. So that's one very significant move for us. The second,
just before you move on,
yes.
because I know how modest you are. But also, I get it. You're not sitting there with the grand virtuous statements that Panasonic is now going to become a climate solutions provider. But just purely for the benefit of anyone in the audience who might be unaware of the impact that refrigerants do have, I'd just like to interject, for a moment, because I was totally unaware, having worked with refrigerant companies for years. I mean, one of my very, very first customers, back in the early 2000s in Cambridge in the UK, was what was part of the business that you're now sitting in today, was the Thermo King business that was owned then by Hassanein. So I've been around refrigerant for a long time, but I was completely unaware that it was still causing an issue environmentally. I was a kid in the 80s, very aware of the campaigns about CFCs and the hole in the ozone layer, and all of those issues were very publicly known. But even up until last year, I was unaware of the sort of devastating impact that the gas that was used to replace CFCs it has from a climate and a global warming perspective. And again, purely for the benefit of the audience. So HFCs, which was the primary sort of replacement that came in to replace CFCs, depending on sort of the way it's dispersed, but can be between 1,000 to 9,000 times more sort of dangerous when it comes to retaining heat in the atmosphere than CO2. I mean, and that's just enormous. And my sort of go-to, sort of Bible for all things, so climate related, this great book Drawdown by Paul Hawken, they put it at number one in terms of issues that if we can tackle it, it's going to have a significant impact. And for all the great work that people like Al Gore and so on have done, they take a very specific focus on CO2 and primarily CO2 and fossil fuels. And what I love so much about Paul Hawken's work in Drawdown is that he takes this very analytical and objective and sort of almost like an investor relations ROI approach to climate in terms of cost and benefit. And essentially refrigerant comes out right at the top of the list in terms of impact and how we can scale it down. Now, in all fairness, they're primarily focused on disposing of what's already been manufactured and what is installed and what is sitting there, sort of very, very slowly edging towards obsolescence. And it's the leakage at the end of the life at disposal that's the biggest issue. But clearly coming out with an alternative that is, a gas that we have in abundance and we could do with less of in the environment, and putting those out in the new units that are being installed moving forward, well, that is going to have a massive benefit. So I'm going to give you some credit for that. And then please move on to your second point.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. And I'm disappointed how slow Australia in particular, but also New Zealand is progressing down this journey. If you go to Europe, there's 30 to 40% adoption of some of these natural refrigerants or CO2, and all the companies that are leading the way are European companies. And we say we've done 25 to 30 supermarkets in New Zealand. There's 1,000 or more supermarkets in New Zealand, so we've got a long way to go. And I think Australia only has 2, and there's probably 3,000 supermarkets in Australia. So long way to go, but certainly in some of the self-contained units, the smaller units, most of our customers are requiring propane as the refrigerant, and with some of the bigger supermarkets, CO2 is becoming a good alternative.
What I think is just on that, what I think is particularly interesting, and I think is becoming more prevalent, unfortunately, but you would hope that there'll be a sort of a sprint to catch up at some point, is the extent to which corporates are actually taking, or arguably control, but certainly setting the pace in terms of sort of responding to the opportunity to make a contribution, to the bigger agenda. We saw it during the bushfires, we saw it during the floods. The primary fundraisers and the primary, sort of engagement, came, yes, from the state level emergency services, but a lot of the fundraising was done by corporate. And a lot of the advocacy has come from corporate. And not from sort of outlying tiddler businesses, with some kind of crazed hermit CEO. These are big businesses listed on the stock markets with a lot of sort of serious investors behind them. and they're driving really hard, sort of on the climate agenda, on the better world leadership front, and the government isn't doing terribly much. So I mean, to an extent, no surprise, but good that you are part of that corporate solution.
Yeah. And the second piece is around energy usage. So there's some staggering statistics when you dig a little bit deeper on energy usage in our space. So in a supermarket, 50% of their energy bill will come from running the fridges and freezers. And that's taking into account they've got also big meaty air conditioning units and lots of lighting and other electricity consuming activities, but 50% or more is from the fridges and freezers. And then when you look at the number of supermarkets in Australia and total up all of that energy usage across Australia, 5% of Australia's electricity is actually consumed by supermarkets, and that's a staggering number for me when you think about how many homes there are, how many businesses there are, how many factories there are in Australia. 5% of Australia's electricity is consumed by supermarkets. So
and therefore 2.5% of Australian energy consumption is by the fridges and freezers in the supermarkets.
Exactly. Yes. So our impact
that is incredible.
Energy usage is huge.
Wow.
It's a big number, a very big number. So we are and continue to do lots of R&D on reducing energy usage in our fridges and freezers and making them more energy efficient, which clearly has a big impact on our customers' costs, because energy costs are also going up. I think they are the second or third largest cost in a supermarket, but also the added benefit is impact on environment as well. So through the design of airflows through a case, the materials we use, the components that go into a case, we're able to drop our energy usage per case down, and energy usage in a whole life of a case down, and that's having a big impact on the environment as well. And some of our more recent launches are the lowest energy consuming cases in the world, taking into account the work that's being done in America and Europe. All cases are tracked in terms of their energy consumption, and our most recent cases are the lowest energy, most energy efficient cases in the world. So I think that's the other big impact we're having on the environment.
No, I mean, no, I wasn't aware that there was that staggering percentage of energy usage. When you look at the whole grid, as you say, for the whole country, all of the industry, all of the homes, everything going on, 2.5% is being sort of consumed by refrigeration in supermarkets. I mean, that's phenomenal. So fantastic that you are having those contributions, and I'm going to keep kind of jibing at your modesty to sort of say it's a big deal. Let's make a big impact. That's great. And furthermore, let's talk about some of the other things that I appreciate are less established. They're more new and sort of to an extent coming soon. If you're able to talk about things like the shelf labels and the lockers, because I mean there's efficiency and there's other forms of waste, other than just sort of excessive energy consumption that you guys are hoping to contribute to solving as well.
Yeah. So electronic shelf labels are basically the price labels on shelf that replace paper, more traditional paper price labels. And at a high level, from a supermarket perspective, they save labor and save paper, and have the ability to update price changes centrally. So there is a payback just associated with materials and labor, but these electronic shelf labels have a number of other benefits that are maybe more relevant to this conversation. And one of those is food wastage. So particularly things like bakery products, maybe fruits to a certain extent. Bakery products are at their best at the point of baking, and then they get progressively worse quality as the day progresses. And then you get to the end of the day, and there's a 50% price reduction to shift bread, and if it isn't sold, it gets dumped. With these electronic shelf labels, you can gradually reduce the price during the day and incentivize people to take better priced bread during the day and reduce wastage at the end of the day. There's some paper savings, definitely some efficiency savings, but also food wastage savings. So there's several benefits coming out of these electronic shelf labels. With regards to refrigerated lockers, and an extension of that is what we call a cold roll box, which is a refrigerated box that you can put into a truck. The benefits there are certainly around food safety, because you can keep the products at the right temperature. If you're bringing something over from WA, or even if you're distributing from supermarket to homes, those products are controlled at the right temperature. But also you can have multi-temperature compartments. So in a locker, you can have some ambient lockers, some refrigerated lockers, and some frozen lockers. And same with the cold roll boxes. You could have a couple of ambient boxes in the truck, and a few refrigerated and a few frozen. And that optimizes the amount of refrigeration that you need to do as you transport products, from farm to supermarket, from supermarket to homes, which ultimately means, again, less burden on the environment. So that's an expanding piece of our business, particularly in this current environment of COVID, when less people want to go to supermarkets. So that whole locker opportunity is exploding for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I think that there shouldn't be any hesitancy, to my mind, in very candidly saying this is going to save money, which is going to make businesses more profitable, and it's good for the environment. I think, if anything, we actually need more bundling up of those things, right? There needs to be a very strong commercial imperative to do something, and an environmental or a sort of a global impact one. And that's what I really sort of like so much about what you're doing and what Panasonic doing. You've got the whole thing bundled up. There isn't you could do this, it'd be lovely to do this, but it's going to cost you the earth, or it's not going to save you any money. It's just a bit of PR opportunity. There's a very real tangible benefit to a bottom line, and sort of a contribution perspective, which I think is fabulous. If we may, I'm going to sort of segue us a little bit, sort of deliberately, specifically towards the leadership element of the conversation, and this is something that you and I talk about a lot. So, what role do you see the leaders in your organization playing in making the world better?
So I think it's about creating sustainable businesses and developing our people to be the best they can be. They're the two big buckets for me. I think I always look to challenge and change whatever business I'm in, so that it can grow and be better and become more sustainable for the future, rather than be profitable now and then fall off on the edge of a cliff in a couple of years' time. And the absolutely essential ingredient in delivering that is by focusing in on our people and making sure that we recruit right, but also that we develop our people to be the best they can be. And if they stay with our business, that's great. They will help drive our business forward. But if they choose to leave, then they're hopefully influencing other businesses to be better as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of sort of Panasonic, you already mentioned that there's a strong culture of giving back, and now focusing on sort of taking the lead on the product side as well. Is there anything in particular that you would single out at the sort of global corporate level that you think is a particularly good example of leadership that other organizations could learn from?
I think for me, the current leadership have opened their eyes to what's happening outside of Japan. So just focusing specifically on Panasonic, they're an incredibly successful global business, but 60% of their revenue and profitability comes from Japan, and they really struggle to commercialize some of those opportunities outside of Japan. I think our current CEO, who's quite inspirational for me, recognizes that their future has to be outside of Japan, and he's challenging a lot of very traditional and cultural norms to open Panasonic up to the world, bringing in people from outside of Japan into his leadership team, and then structuring the business very differently in China and the US, recognizing that what those two geographies need is very different to what Panasonic, I guess, adopts within Japan. And for me, that's quite good to see, to be honest, because I would have said 5 years ago, if Japan hadn't recognized that fundamental shift requirements, then not only Panasonic but many other Japanese companies, I think, would be struggling as we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting shift. I would almost say in globalization, right? That again, if I go back, sort of 20, 25 years, as a high school student looking at globalization, it was immediately associated with McDonaldization. Same thing everywhere, same imprint. You could work into a sort of a store in Kenya or in Brazil or in Estonia and get the exact same thing, exact same experience. The big shift that I've observed is that there'll be a fundamental that is the same, but more and more that is almost a philosophical core, that you get something comparable, but there's a huge appreciation for the need to and the benefit of being different and being more localized. And you can therefore say, well, it's being more adaptable, it's being more appreciative of diversity, but it's also sort of engaging with a marketplace on its own variables. And I think one of the best examples I've seen of doing that, as much as I would criticize them on a number of other points, but Zara, has a brand name, but then they have a completely different approach to market as a retailer in every country. They have a different line of clothing. They have a different, sort of style that sort of looks and feels. And it's interesting that, making fridges and freezers, that needs to be, sort of localized potentially in the way that you run your channels to market, or, sort of the way that you bundle products, or perhaps it might be, a particular final, sort of dressing, the final shell on the product needs to be more, sort of acutely relevant, to the particular sort of social connotations of a marketplace. But yeah, I think that's a trend and a pattern that I'm seeing. And, to your point, Japan has produced some phenomenally successful corporations, but they were way behind the 8 ball on that trend. So if they're running now to catch up, and as the Japanese tend to, once they get an idea in their head, they tend to really execute very, very strongly, then potentially we'll see them being at the forefront in the future.
Yep.
Okay, so final question. What would you, or penultimate question, what would you recommend leaders in particular can do if they want to strive to make the world better?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult one, that one. I think having a vision and a plan are for me, the simple and obvious answers to that question. We can all dream about our impacts on the world and what we might be able to do, but until you actually define that and then bed it into your business and then build a plan around that and execute that plan, it'll never happen. So I firmly believe the leadership team's role is to create that vision and mission. And we've done that off-site in the Blue Mountains, sat around a fire, with a bottle of wine, and then hone that and fine tune that vision over a period of time. And then, once that vision is set, then communicating that and crystallizing that into an action plan is for me the simple steps that are required to get there. And then, endlessly communicating that vision and plan. It's no good if it's just sat in 6 or 7 people's heads. I make a point of repeatedly referring back to our vision and mission in every single presentation we do, whether it's a town hall, a roadshow, a written communication, and I get a lot of pleasure out of people saying to me, "Oh, not that strategy again," or "not that slide," because it means we're getting there. So communicating that, particularly if it's different to what people are used to doing now, is absolutely key.
Perfect. Are there any specific behaviors that you would recommend? This is the final question. Any specific behaviors that you'd recommend a leader could adopt?
Yeah, so we've got 7 Hussman behaviors, and I love them all. But the ones that I'd call out as my favorites. One is respectful courage. I think speaking your mind and calling issues or behaviors out is really important, but doing it in a respectful way so that the message lands in the right way. So that's one for me. Challenge and change is at the core of everything I do. I think if you carry on doing what you're doing now, you won't be here in 5 years' time. So always looking above the horizon and challenging the business and changing in the right way is a really important behavior for me. And then the third is owner mindset. If you treat your business or your function or your area of activity as your own, then I think the outcomes are much more powerful.
No, I think those are fabulous, and yeah, I love those too. So I would say I would adopt them myself, but in a way I think I already have. But no, I think that's fabulous. Look, thank you very much for all that you've shared and for the great work that you are doing. Do you have any sort of particular requests that people could now, sort of follow a path to, sort of reach out to you, get in touch with you specifically, or just to find out more about what you're doing?
So I'd love to hear what others are doing, and I think these podcasts are a great vehicle to listen to, other leaders' perspectives. But if anyone else has a view or some thoughts, I'd love to connect with like-minded people, and my LinkedIn connection is probably the easiest way to do that. But I'm always looking
in the show notes for people to get in touch with you directly.
No, perfect.
And the website so people can see these marvelous products, and hopefully there's lots of retail, sort of construction procurement people or architects listening who can get involved on helping fix the energy consumption and the refrigerant usage in the large retail network that we certainly have here and that there exists globally. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution to Better World Leaders, and certainly more to follow.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. Thank you.